Okay, I was as an introduction, I was a rich kid, but not for long. My mother divorced in 1975, and she and I moved to San Francisco because of a con man named Stephen. And my mother had problems that might be apparent, but only in the last sentence of this piece. Once a week, we went to the Washington Square Bar and Grill, a gossipy hangout where we sat at a large round table with an ever-changing society, and we all felt incredibly sophisticated. Margot St. James, who was organizing a prostitutes union, seemed moderately amused to discuss her job with an 11-year-old. I met Art Hoppy and Stanton Delaplane, and a couple of times Herb Cain waved at us as he crossed the room, but he didn't slow down. The wash bag was up the street from the best comic book shop I'd ever seen. So when things got slow, Stephen would hand me a $10 bill. When I came back, I read the latest Avengers while waiting for my spaghetti. It turned out that the Vision was actually the original Human Torch, a fact I couldn't get the adults interested in as they were busy flirting. San Francisco in 1975 was a city built for dating. There was no activity from shopping to exercising to taking the bus that didn't have quotation marks around it. Everyone knew whatever motions you were making toward working or eating or buying clothes was only a ploy. My mother couldn't go to Safeway without men ramming their carts into hers and asking how long it took to cook a chicken breast. Stephen had his own routine. Every morning he showered and shaved and put on his leather coat and walked downhill 2 blocks and sat with a paper folded back next to a cafe au lait in the front window of the Cafe Cantata on Union Street. This is how he met what he called his newies, asking them if he could buy them a balloon and take them to Paris. Sometimes he sent his girlfriend in his place to bring newies back to the house for him. The newies were always impressed that he lived uphill in Pacific Heights, not in the marina where most of them lived. Sometimes I met him at the cafe, and he expounded to me about the world. Kid, when I turn 40, I want to be known as the Silver Fox. So I'm going to pay my friends $1,000 each to remember that. Kid, stop cracking your knuckles and stop slouching. Jesus, the way you moan about your life, it's like you know nothing about your people's history. Have you read The Painted Bird? No, that kid had something to complain about. Whenever I stayed at the cafe long enough, he gave me $10 to pretend I was his son. See that girl there with the black hair? Tell her your father wants to buy her a balloon and take her to Paris. My mother was driving me somewhere and she said, I have to get my watch back. I asked where it was. She'd left it at a man's house. What's next, your underwear? This came out too quickly. It was like I'd hit her in the face. My mind was going in circles. Was there any legitimate reason an adult woman would take off her watch at a man's place? I really wanted to scramble backwards and tell her I'd just been bantering and sophisticated. Later, Stephen pulled me aside. I'd really hurt my mother's feelings with that underwear wisecrack. If it hurts her feelings, she needs to stop leaving her jewelry at men's houses. I was still puzzled by how the watch had ended up off, as I wanted all the evidence to add up to her only pretending to have sex. Stephen said, Kid, your mother respects you. She's treating you like an adult. You have to react like an adult and respect her back. No judgments, end game. Soon after, we went to a party at Stephen's house. He didn't bother leaving his throne and overstuffed chair by the fireplace to say hello. It was the kind of night when he seemed self-contained and impatient with me. Kid, go read the new Ott Bodkins book upstairs. Check it out. There's a new one? Yeah, it's great. When I collapsed on the couch in his office, I saw it was the same book as last time. He just told me it was new to get rid of me for the evening, which was fine. I reminded myself I didn't like seeing him either sometimes. 1 minute later, my mother was upstairs. We're going. I protested, but she was already stepping down the stairs with outsized caution, her shoulders stiff as she shuffled through her purse for her car keys. Then we were in the Mercedes, and she was sitting very upright. She gave off furnace-like heat, and it was hard to look straight at her. I think she'd stopped blinking. We lived about a mile away, but every street corner had a stop sign that seemed to take her by surprise. I held onto my seatbelt. I looked out the window. The way back home was a straight line along Pacific Avenue. I'd started learning about when things were built, because when I walked to school and saw a house that looked embarrassingly out of place, it always turned out to be from the 1950s. I felt sorry for those houses. We parked in front of our apartment building. My mother curbed the wheels. She turned off the engine. There were jets of fog rolling toward us. Looking straight ahead, she hissed, "Stephen and his precious fellatio." Years later, my mother got stoned and started writing her life story. She told it from my point of view. It was called My Mother's Lovers and Other Reasons I'm Class Valedictorian. My character was a jaded 11-year-old who can't be bothered to remember his mother's boyfriend's names, and so he gives them nicknames like the Mad Italian Professor. When she read it aloud to me, I felt the same queasiness I did when she described an article she'd seen about mother-son incest taboos. In some tribes, she said, sexual experiences like that were part of the growing up process, and wasn't that interesting? The real Mad Italian Professor, Cesare, was only a graduate student. That was a distinction I didn't know about for years. I remember whenever he got angry, he absently twisted the hair of his eyebrows into satanic peaks. Once he said Schopenhauer would have hated me. Schopenhauer was a fool, I said, even though I'd never heard of him. But I was 11 years old, didn't matter. Me saying that sent Cesare into a fit, escalating until he finally pointed to my bedroom and said, "Go!" This was okay. I was impressed he had no intention of being my friend. My mother was frequently out most of the night. I used to stay up talking to myself and listening to the sounds of the San Francisco evenings. There were foghorns that struck me as mournful, and a strange ticking that I realized was condensation dripping from a gutter onto a ledge. I watched The Tonight Show on a portable black and white set and kept switching off in case what I just heard was my mother coming home. My cat, Leo, had a cat door. Sometimes I heard him scurrying in with a mouse, and I would get up and watch him spar with it until it was dead. One night, Leo jumped out his door and back in. He meowed. He had that Siamese nuclear wail of a voice. I went to the kitchen in time to see him jump out the door again. "You want me to follow you, boy?" I opened the kitchen door. I was in my pajamas. Outside, a set of wooden stairs, painted 20 years before, a cream color, now flaked, weather-beaten. Leo was on the flight leading up. He seemed to be waiting for me. I carefully left the door on its latch. As I went up the stairs, Leo paused on every landing for me. He led me to the roof. I hadn't known you could get to the roof. It was flat with flashing around the vents and chimneys that poked through the surface. There was mist sweeping past us, little pebbles illuminated by the brilliant streetlights in front of our apartment building, but I wasn't cold. Leo walked along the edge of the roof, tail straight up, watching his kingdom 4 stories below. There was no one on the street, no cars, no pedestrians. I could see the lights in windows of houses near us, but no one was moving. It was just me and Leo and the foghorns. I felt extended beyond myself. Though I couldn't say why, I didn't want to leave this. I said, "Thank you, Leo," like he had orchestrated it for me. As I walked back to the apartment, the telephone was ringing. I answered it. I heard a quick voice. My mother's? Someone else's? And then confused noises, and I felt terrified. "Are you there? Listen, just listen. Hold on." It was my mom. I held the phone. Suddenly, 4-part harmony came up, a cappella. I'd heard it on the radio before. It was a song called Operator. and it had a gospel insistence that was catchy. People on the other end of the phone were clapping along in a poor white person Pacific Heights attempt at keeping time. I had no idea what was going on. Mom was breaking some kind of contract by calling me. She was supposed to enjoy herself without letting me know. I was supposed to be home, perfecting my loneliness. When the song was over, Mom got back on the phone. "Did you hear that, darling? Do you know who that was?" "No." "The Manhattan Transfer. They're in Stephen's living room. Lots of love. Mommy has to go now." She had called herself Mommy. This was to make herself feel young at the expense of making me feel 4 years old. I managed to be half asleep when my mother came home. With her, it turned out, was the party. Soon the liquor and music and laughter had reignited. I shuffled out of my bedroom. Sometimes an 11-year-old smartass lent an exotic presence to my mother's parties. But I had a sense for atmosphere, and this one struck me as off-kilter. The lights were low. I didn't recognize anyone. People were locking themselves into our bathrooms in pairs, and coming out exceedingly alert, accelerated cheer. In the living room, my mother was sitting on a man's lap. When she saw me, her face went livid. "Out!" she yelled. I made it to my bedroom door and then realized that was ceding my territory. I returned to the living room where my mother was still in the man's lap. He was blonde, with a mustache and a half smirk. If I meant to seem like a cop, he looked at me like he knew I didn't have a warrant. I extended my hand. "Hi, I'm Glenn. I'm the son." "Giorgio," he said, but not as if I'd shaken him up. "I told you to go to bed." "Mom, I'm plagued by feelings of unreality." She stood, grabbed me by the wrist, and led me back to my room. "Go to bed." "But Mom, I'm plagued by..." "No, you're not!" She swept me into my room and slammed the door. I listened to the mysterious party sounds and felt sorry for myself. Eventually, regardless of the noise, I fell asleep. I woke up when I felt the weight of my bed shift. There was a man sitting at the end of the bed. He wore a black leather jacket and a leather cap. "Sorry," he stood. I was trying to be quiet. There's every reason when looking at this with contemporary eyes to fear for my safety. It was 1975 in San Francisco, however, and expressing fear at the unfamiliar or threatening would have meant I was square, straight, the kind of guy who, in the words of Stephen, stepped out of the shower to pee. So I behaved as if this were normal. This didn't mean I was safe, as terrible men have always taken advantage of those who attempt bohemian life. "No, seriously, sorry. Go back to sleep." He looked apologetic, as if the full weirdness of being in my room had hit him. I can go back to the party." He looked at the door grimly. Finally, he said, "It's only that your mother said you had the latest issue of the Fantastic Four." "I do," I said brightly. "It's on my spinner rack." I've had a spinner rack. "Whoa, you do have comics," the guy said. "The spinner rack is terrible for condition. It bends comics. You can read whatever you want, but be careful taking them out." "Oh, cool, thanks." When he looked over the comic book rack, his face fell. "Wow, what happened to Captain America?" "I know, he looks dead, but that's just an imposter. The government let him down, so Cap stopped wearing his old costume, and he's Nomad now." When there was an especially loud burst of laughter from the party through the closed door, he tossed up a dismissive hand as if apologizing for all things adult. "I'm Allen, by the way. I'm in the group." "Group? The Manhattan Transfer?" "Oh, are you going to sing?" "Oh, I hope not." "What's going on in the Hulk? Is he still Bob Banner?" I corrected him. "Bruce Banner." And then filled him in on the latest. The Hulk had left Canada and actually fought his own shadow in the latest issue. Allen found a seat at my desk under my task lamp. He checked his fingers for dirt before he started reading. "Turn off the light when I go," he said. I got back into bed. I thought of questions to ask Allen, but he seemed to like the silence. This was the kind of adult I met more often than you'd think in San Francisco. Interesting, talented, and kind enough to wipe his hands before looking at my comics. It made me love where we lived. It felt good to know there were adults who could be at the party who didn't want to be at the party. When I woke up later, he was gone. My comics were in a neat, squared-off stack, and the task lamp was off. The next morning, I found a sandwich my mother had made for me on the counter in a brown bag with a can of soda. This meant she'd made it before going to bed, and she was still asleep. I went off to school. When I came back that afternoon, she was sitting in the living room, weeping. She held a crumpled Kleenex in her fist. The telephone was at her feet. I asked her what was wrong, and between sobs, she answered. Her man from last night, Giorgio, had just been arrested. He'd been trying to pawn her jewelry. I put my arms around her shoulders, trying to give her a hug to comfort her, but I was awkward. I didn't know if I should say anything. She pulled away from me. She looked at me with watering eyes. He could have just asked me for the money, damn it. I can't believe he was so intimidated by me having nice things he couldn't even ask. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Then she stood, got her purse and her keys together, reapplied her lipstick, and walked to the car alone. She drove to the police station and bailed him out.